Hey, welcome. So today, we're going to tackle a really interesting and, let's be honest, sometimes frustrating question. Why do virtues like honesty and humility seem to be in such short supply? Why is it so incredibly hard for some people to just say, I was wrong? Okay, let's get into it.
I mean, we've all been there, right? You're in a debate, maybe an argument, and you present clear, undeniable facts, but the other person just digs in their heels. They refuse to admit they're mistaken. So what is actually happening in that moment? Well, it turns out the answer is a lot deeper and way more complex than just a big ego or simple stubbornness.
To really understand this, we've got to look at our first big idea, how things like truth and humility can literally just vanish. And it's not because people are just deciding to be bad, but because of the environment they find themselves in.
So here's the core idea, that ability to feel humility, to be truthful with others, or even to feel a healthy sense of shame. These are not just simple choices we make in a vacuum. They're actually high-level emotions. You could even call them cultural products that can only really grow and blossom when the conditions are just right.
Okay, so what are those conditions? This brings us to the absolute heart of this whole thing, an idea that kind of changes how you see everything. Security creates truth.
Just let that sink in for a second. Truth is a product of security. What this incredible statement is suggesting is that our capacity for honesty, both with ourselves and with other people, it isn't some fixed character trait. Nope, it's conditional. It completely depends on whether or not we feel fundamentally safe.
And to really get this, we need to talk about something called higher-order emotions. Now, these aren't your basic gut-level feelings like fear or anger. We're talking about complex psychological states like humility and honesty. And the crucial point, the real takeaway here, is that they need a baseline of safety to even show up in the first place.
Think about it this way. What does it actually mean to admit you're wrong? It means you're making yourself vulnerable. You're exposing a weakness. And you can only really afford to do that if, deep down, you trust that you won't be totally destroyed for it. Without that feeling of safety, being vulnerable isn't a chance to grow. It feels like a life-or-death threat.
So let's move on to our third section and see how this all connects. What happens when that critical sense of safety gets taken away? Well, the human brain pretty much shifts into a completely different operating system. Just look at this contrast here. In a stable, safe environment, we have the mental space for self-reflection. Humility is seen as a strength, and making mistakes is just an opportunity to learn and grow. But when things feel unstable, when your job, your status, your safety feels at risk, all the rules change. Self-defense mode kicks in. Self-justification becomes a shield, and admitting a mistake feels like you're handing your enemy a weapon to use against you.
And this is the key. When you see someone constantly justifying everything they do, refusing to back down no matter what, it might not be a moral failure. From their perspective, in the world they're experiencing, it's a totally logical survival strategy. They're not trying to be difficult. They're trying to survive a threat that feels very, very real to them.
And this slide really breaks down that subconscious chain reaction. First, a person perceives a threat to their survival. It could be financial, social, whatever. Second, their automatic, built-in self-defense mechanisms just activate. Third, the actual truth, admitting a weakness, is now seen as a liability, something that could get them hurt. And fourth, because of all that, humility becomes a luxury that they feel they simply cannot afford.
Okay, so this brings us to our final and maybe most profound section, the real condition for maturity. We're going to zoom out now from just individual psychology to what all this means for society as a whole.
And this is such a critical distinction to make. The ability to practice humility and honestly seek the truth, it's not necessarily tied to how smart you are or how many degrees you have. It's about something way deeper, existential stability. It's that fundamental, often unspoken feeling that your place in the world is secure.
And you can see this play out all over the real world. The source material points to a few great examples where this dynamic is really common. In developing nations where daily life is a constant struggle, in communities where a lack of education limits people's options and creates deep insecurity, and even inside wealthy societies, among people who grew up without a reliable safety net, whether that's financial or emotional. The common thread isn't geography or smarts, it's the lack of foundational security.
And that leads to a pretty huge conclusion when you think about it. The true maturity of a society isn't just measured by its economy or its military power. It's measured by its ability to provide that deep, fundamental sense of stability to its people.
A society where people feel safe is a society where virtues like truth and humility can actually take root and grow.
Which leaves us with this final, powerful question to think about. If security is the soil that's needed for truth and humility to grow, then what do we really need to be building and cultivating for our society to truly mature? It kind of shifts the whole conversation from judging people for being defensive to asking how we can create a more stable world for everyone. Thanks for digging into this with me.